Back WNST weekend as I took a little U2 mental sanity break out on the West Coast, but we're back in action, and lo and behold, I was in Vancouver, British Columbia on a Saturday afternoon. It was supposed to be raining sideways, but it wasn't, and I'm walking around the city, and I stuck my head in the bar, and lo and behold, the Orioles in their pink unis and the Royals in their pink unis were on the telly on Saturday afternoon. So, Luke, as much as I can go, BAM and Major League Baseball advanced media and take the game everywhere I go, even walking around a city like Vancouver, where I don't even know if they know what baseball is there, I did get a chance to watch the Orioles and the Royals over the weekend, but let's be honest, pal, I didn't miss much, did I?
Yeah, you were talking about sanity. Not much sanity watching the Orioles this weekend, and really going back to the final game of that series against the Nationals. Things have been going so well. They had won 6 straight. They were 22-10. And let's face it, we knew they weren't going to continue to play at a clip well over 667 ball. The issues for this team didn't necessarily change because of a 4-game losing streak, and those issues were there when they were winning. But they just become they come under the microscope a little bit more in the focus. And it's very clear, what this team's dealing with. Clearly, not having Zach Britton has been an issue. The bullpen held it together really well for the first 2 weeks he was out. Since then, not so much. The starting pitching of late hasn't gotten as deep in the games, and we can talk specifically about Kevin Gausman, who I wrote about at WNST.net on Monday. But, one of the big issues that hasn't been talked about too much, but it really came to the forefront in the first 2 games of the 3-game sweep at Kansas City was the lack of offense. The fact that this has been for the most part, a below-average offense, and hasn't even hit a ton of home runs until the bats finally did heat up a little bit as the series went on. But these are all things that they were overcoming for most of the start of the season, and here over the last 4 or 5 days, they didn't overcome. So all one-run losses. That's something that they had done really well with one-run games, but that's typically something most teams, even good teams, you're going to be hovering somewhere around 500 in one-run games. If you're really lucky, you can be above 500, and if you're not as fortunate, you'll drop a few more of those. So I think what we've seen with the Orioles here, a little bit of a market correction, a little bit of a regression to the mean or the norm or however you want to describe it.
Well, that has to happen when you're playing 700 ball.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think it's anything to necessarily panic over, because these were all things that we were talking about even when they were winning. Now you kind of you reset. You get hopefully get yourselves back on track against the Tigers, who haven't exactly been playing great baseball to start the season. Their pitching has really been below where they need it to be, considering their offense hasn't been outrageous or anything like that. So get yourselves situated, and then I think we might get a better idea of what this team is really all about now as we move forward over these next few weeks, knowing that Zach Britton's not going to be back until sometime late June, best case scenario, it seems. So we kind of get an idea of what this team's really all about. You're never as good as you are when you're winning 6 in a row like they were last week, and you're never as bad as it looked over the weekend when you're being swept by the Kansas City Royals in a place that frankly continues to be a house of horrors for the Orioles.
All right, well, let's go issue by issue here, and I think we've all expected the bats to wake up, and I know we've talked at length about how many home runs Trumbo's going to hit, Davis, and where their averages are going to be, and they're going to get in these hot streaks, and there's going to be a week where Chris Davis will be the best player in Major League Baseball. Ditto for Machado and a lot of the rest of these guys, but the pitching has been the story of the offseason. It was the story of spring training. Certainly, when they're playing 700 ball, the pitching's been a big part of that story. But Gausman and their need to rely upon him, and as we've talked about, they don't have a whole lot on the farm here. There's very little margin for error, and we knew that going in with Bundy and with Gausman, especially losing Tillman earlier on. Gausman, I don't know what you do other than give him the ball every the 5th day, unless he's injured in some way, which doesn't appear to be, but he's really having trouble finding the strike zone, right?
Yeah, this is easily the biggest surprise of the season. I'd say even more so. And assuming Mark Trumbo is going to start hitting, and look, I never expected Trumbo to hit 47 home runs again, but I assume he's going to be better than what he's been. He swung the bat a little bit better here of late. But look, if you look at every other issue with this team, I'm not surprised to see the starting rotation in general not exactly performing at a high level, although it hasn't been their biggest problem sans Gosman. The bullpen struggling without Zach Britton, wow, that's a big shock. I mean, let's face it, let's call a spade there. If anyone had said that Zach Britton was going to miss the better part of a month over the first 7 weeks of the season, you'd expect the bullpen to struggle, and that's not to be flippant about it. It's just
and I wouldn't expect the Orioles to be a half game off first place if you would have told me that, right?
So, but even if we put aside any visions of Kevin Gosman taking that next step to become an ace this year, which we were talking about that a lot. We talked about how brilliant he was over the last 2 months of last season with Chris Tillman missing roughly a month and not being at his best. Kevin Gosman pitched looked every bit the part of an ace over the final 11, 12 starts of his 2016 campaign, and you're thinking at age 26, all right, maybe this is when he takes the step from solid middle-of-the-rotation starter, which he has been for the better part of the last 3 years. Go back since the start of 2014, those 3 seasons, he had a 3.77 ERA. That's not ace material. I fully acknowledge that, but that's middle-of-the-rotation starter in this day and age in Major League Baseball. You'll take that, even if you were longing for more along the way. But he hasn't even been close to being that guy. So, I mean, you look at it and you try to break this down, and as I wrote about at WNST.net, you look at the velocity, it's on par with where it's been. His fastball velocity is right in the neighborhood of where it was the last 2 months of last season. So, that makes you think it's not injury-related, although the command's been really off, and command can often be the early sign of there being something in disarray from a physical standpoint. Now, there's been no chatter of him being hurt. Buck Showalter has said on a few different occasions this year that he's in a better place physically than he's been in the last couple of years. Keep in mind, early last season, had the shoulder tendonitis. 2 years ago, had the shoulder tendonitis. So, by all accounts, they say he's healthy. He's throwing hard. That hasn't been the issue. So, you kind of just keep going down the list. And, it hasn't been talked about a whole lot, but he's gone back to throwing the slider as his primary breaking pitch this year, whereas the 2 previous years was throwing more of a curveball. The curveball he's mixed in, including to Xander Bogaerts, which got him tossed in the game at Fenway, but he's throwing a different breaking ball. Did he focus on that so much in the spring that he's gotten himself completely out of whack? I know he's talked about his mechanics not being consistent. It's clear that he hasn't had command. I mean, even from his rookie season on, this was not a kid who walked a lot of batters. I mean, this wasn't someone who was going out there walking 5 or 6 people like we'd see from Jake Arrieta 6 years ago. I mean, that wasn't part of his profile, even when he wasn't being totally successful. So you just go down the list. Is it mental? Did this kid put too much? Did the idea of being the opening day starter and needing to step up in place of Tillman, and maybe seeing Bundy having the success he's had with a fraction of the major league experience, has that gotten to him, or is it a combination of all these things? I don't know, but it's hard to figure out. And I know a lot of people, out of frustration, they've thrown out the names Jake Arrieta, Brian Mattis. And I get that because Kevin Gosman's been awful in 2017. He got the worst ERA among qualified AL starters right now.
Only Bartolo Colon is worse, according to you at WNST.net.
But that being said, comparing him to Brian Mattis, who never had any extended periods of success as a starter with the Orioles. Same with Jake Arrieta. I mean, for all the talk about Gosman maybe not becoming an ace, maybe not being a number 1 starter, maybe not having a good win-loss record if you put much stock into that, and I think poor run support's been the biggest explanation for that over the last previous couple years. This is a guy who had been a rock-solid starter, even if he wasn't better than a number 3 or a number 4, let's say. So for him to go from that for a period of 400 innings roughly to now being a guy who's been one of the worst pitchers in baseball, it just doesn't add up. And, is it mental? Is he a head case? I mean, okay, maybe, but how did he pitch so well for 3 years if that's solely the issue? So it's tough to figure out. And the biggest problem is, like I said, it's one thing to talk about him becoming a starter or becoming an ace and taking that next step. And certainly we were talking about that being important, not knowing what was going to happen with Tillman. Bundy being in his first year as a starter and not having much confidence in Jimenez or Miley, obviously. But this guy's not just staying in place. I mean, he's not just regressed. I mean, he's running in the opposite direction. I mean, it's rapidly going in the wrong direction. I think he has enough of a track record that you have to stick with him, at least for the time being. As you pointed out, there isn't an abundance of alternatives that are palatable at this point. I mean, okay, Alec Asher's looked okay at times. Some other guys have looked okay at times. They've had some other times they haven't looked okay.
Well, you're not going to hide him in the bullpen. You got to give him the ball. I don't know if you're going to send him down to Norfolk. I mean, this week he's going to get an extra day of rest before he has to see the Blue Jays here this weekend, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I think for now, unless it just continues to be completely sideways, and I'm talking continuing to have a 7 ERA, I think you have to keep running them out there, and you have to hope that Roger McDowell and Alan Mills can work with him in some of his side sessions, and he can get himself back to at least being the guy that he's been over the last few years, which is dependable starter, even if not great, certainly a guy that you penciled in and you didn't really think about it too much. But if he's going to continue to have an ERA over 7, then you do have to start talking about, well, what are you going to do? Does the bullpen help? I mean, it's just it's not a good position to be in because we've talked about it. I mean, Chris Tillman, watching him on Saturday, I mean, he's battling. He's given them a chance, I suppose you could say, but his velocity is not where it was the last couple of years. I don't know if they were going to be able to count on that with the shoulder. I mean, we don't know if he's going to hold up over the course of the whole season. So, you can't count on Chris Tillman to suddenly become the pre-injury Chris Tillman magically. And we've talked about Bundy. He's been terrific, yes, but he's also up there as far as workload as much as anyone in baseball. I don't know how far down the road you want to go with that, considering he only threw, 107, 108 innings last year. I mean, it's really an uncomfortable position to be in, and as much as we talked about questions for this rotation, at the very least, more than anything else, all those other pitchers we've talked about, you at least assume that Kevin Gausman would be what he's been the last couple of years. You at least
you thought he was an is, not a might be, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's established himself as an is, at least middle of the rotation kind of guy, and for him to not even be close to being that, I mean, it's got to be.
We've
really
seen a lot of guys fall apart, though, dude. Look at Chris Archer last year.
Yeah.
Look at down in Houston, where a kid looks like he's going to win 20 games, and they fell out last year. Now back again with Keuchel this year.
Yeah.
Young pitchers.
Zach Greinke, look at him. I mean, he was a mess a few years ago, and I mean, it's volatile. It can be, but until you can pinpoint what it is, and you pray it's nothing physical, because that's the issue that can't be fixed without surgery or time on the DL or whatever it might be. And again, I'm just speculating, but when you see someone be as out of whack as he has been after pitching effectively as long as he has over the last few years, even if not great, solid at the very least, it really makes you scratch your head. And hey, if I had a great answer for you, I'd be the next Rick Peterson or Roger McDowell or Dave Wallace, and I'd have them fixed. But
even the critics point out, even Jake Arrieta is struggling this year, right?
Yeah. But even someone like Arrieta this year, his velocity's down about 2 miles per hour from where it was the last couple years. So there's no. I don't see any magic bullet for what's ailing Kevin Gausman, other than clearly his command is not there. But what's causing that? Is it just inconsistent mechanics? Is it he focused so much on trying to throw the slider as opposed to the curve, and that's kind of had him all out of whack? His split changeup, which is from day one, from the time he arrived in 2013 in the major leagues, that's been his best secondary pitch. He's thrown it less frequently than ever, and when he has thrown it, it's not getting the same consistent break on it and not commanding it as well. So, I mean, long story short, Kevin Gausman's a mess, and I'm not exactly sure what the magic cure is to fix him, but for the Orioles' sake, I hope he finds it much sooner rather than later.
3 games in less than 48 hours for the Orioles as they get it on in Detroit. The starters are out there. It's Miley, it's Jimenez, and it's Bundy. In the case of Miley, he has been better than we thought he could have been, right? We're all in I do not expect this 2.5 ERA thing to hold much longer, right?
Yeah, I don't, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that he's not pitching deep into games. He's putting a boatload of runners on base, and what's helped him is he's been able to strand runners. And look, that's something that clearly there's skill involved with that, and he's been able to make big pitches in big spots. But at the rate that he's stranding runners and the average that he's holding the opposition to with runners in scoring position, they're not sustainable numbers. I mean, that's going to catch up to him. When you're talking about a pitcher who is walking 5.5 batters per 9 innings and has a whip of 1.4, I mean, that doesn't add up to 2.45 ERA. You don't have to be a sabermetric genius to conclude that. So he's weird to figure out this year. His strikeouts are way up from his career mark. He's striking out over 3 more batters per 9 innings than he has in his career. I mean, that's he's not throwing that much harder or anything like that. But he's clearly getting strikeouts. That shows skill to be able to do that. But in the process, he's walking a ton of hitters. He's throwing a ton of pitches. He's not getting deep in the games. I mean, 7 starts, he only has 36 2/3 innings. I mean, that tells you right there. That coupled with the 2.45 ERA, that tells you how hard he's had to work to keep the opposition from scoring.
That's a lot of 5-inning appearances right there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of 5-inning. I mean, his last time out, he threw almost 120 pitches just to get through 5. I mean, that's unheard of. So, but that being said, he has been better than you would have expected, and certainly worlds better than he was last year when he wasn't getting through 5 innings because he was getting knocked around so hard and giving up so many runs more so. So, I mean, you look at him, I mean, I don't know what to make. I think he's better than he was last year. I mean, the ERA shows that, but some of the peripherals really make you nervous. Again, he's another guy who wasn't walking hitters at all over the course of his career, and suddenly he's walking hitters this year. So you look at that, you don't know what you're going to get with Jimenez. I mean, for every good 1 or 2 good outings you get, you figure on 4 or 5 that are going to be bad to really bad. And, clearly with Chris Tillman, and, you don't know what's going on with him. He's been okay.
So far, so good, though, right?
Oh, better than the alternative of him saying his shoulder hurts. I mean,
bro, if you would have told me back on opening day when we were talking about these things, you would have said, well, he'll be back pitching by Preakness and have a couple starts and, taking his turn every 5th day. I'd say, well, then the Orioles are probably going to be okay if that really does happen. So for that, they've had some good fortune there as much as they've had bad fortune on Britton, right?
Yeah, and with him, again, it's really a matter of what does this look like over the long haul. I mean, Chris Tillman at this point, he's 29 years old. He's got the moxie. He's got the experience. He knows how to get major league hitters out even when he doesn't have his best stuff. And let's face it, even a healthy Tillman, he was never a guy that was, at least since he's been effective, and maybe early in his career he tried to throw as hard as he can, but he hasn't been a guy that has a fastball sitting in the mid-90s and blowing people away. He cuts the ball, uses the changeup, uses the curve. The slider was really effective for him last year. In fact, he threw that pitch more than he ever did. You wonder if maybe that had something to do with his shoulder having the issue. But with him, it's just a matter of, I think he can compete. I think he can be competitive for them and get them some quality outings and give them a chance to win. But it's a matter of, is it a situation where he's on borrowed time? That's where you just ask, because he's had the shoulder issue going back to last August off and on. So it's been good to see that. And, in the meantime, all those other issues, you have Dylan Bundy, who's just, continued to pitch like one of the best pitchers in the American League. And, again, the innings make me nervous, the workload that he's already had. And, he's pitched well enough to warrant staying in games, but at the same time, it's hard to forget all about his injury history and that he is still so inexperienced at the major league level. But given the state of the bullpen, given the state of the rest of the rotation, it's hard to blame Buck Showalter if Bundy's pitching well to run him out there and let him throw 110, 111 pitches. It's just one of those things that you continue to cross your fingers while enjoying to watch him pitch, because he continues to pitch exceptionally well. And let's face it, if the Orioles didn't have him, they might still be above 500, but they'd be much closer to 500 than where they sit right now, even after a 4-game losing.
Well, if you're making an appointment with Dylan Bundy, it'll be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday.
Yeah.
Bundy and Zimmerman, the Thursday starters. Wednesdays, Jimenez and Fulmer. And then, of course, on Tuesday night, Miley and Boyd. And the Orioles get back home this weekend against the Toronto Blue Jays. You know, we've created so much war with the Red Sox, you've almost forgot about the Blue Jays wars, right? I'm sure that'll get picked up on Friday.
Yeah, no, the Blue Jays quietly here because, I mean, they were so dreadful to start the season. You know, they've been playing better baseball. You know, they dropped the opener in their series to Atlanta, but you know, they just had a 4-game sweep over Seattle, another team that, you know, high expectations, but they've been pretty miserable to start the season.
Hey, they have a chance to be at 500 by the end of the month. I would have never thought that back in the middle of April,
yeah,
right?
I mean, we talk about this all the time. I mean, the ebbs and flows of a season, it's always more magnified in April. There's no doubt about that. But, you know, right now the Chicago Cubs are hovering around 500, and all of baseball is wondering what's wrong with them. But, you know, if they have a stretch where they go, you know, 18-19 at some point from the middle of June into July, you know, few people even bat an eyelash. So in the case of Toronto, they've had a ton of injuries. They got off to the bad start, but you know, they're playing better. You know, we've all talked about how that rotation, even if it wasn't going to be as good as it was last year, it's still talented enough. Once they get healthy, if they get fully healthy, that it can be good enough to you know, keep them in contention. And you know, they still have a long way to go. I mean, they're still 5 games under 500, but compared to where they were 3 weeks ago, I think Blue Jays fans would gladly take that. And I think you know, reports of their demise might have been a little bit exaggerated early on in the season.
You know, we haven't talked about offense at all. You know, I saw Trey Mancini throwing around pink bats over the weekend, and, you know, he's become a bigger part of this thing, I think, offensively, or at least a piece of this thing for them. I don't know that we all would have said, you know, in the offseason, Trey Mancini is going to be a part of this thing. That's, you know, seeing guys emerge, seeing guys come through the system and actually be able to do this. It took us a long time to get to that point where there's a Machado one year and a Scope the next year, and you find a Caleb Joseph that can play a little bit through the organization. You know, for the offense and for the at-bats, this is, you know, Buck's going to have to do a nice job this summer because there's a lot of guys here that you would say in certain circumstances I'd like to get, you know, Kim some at-bats, or I'd like to get Mancini in the lineup. I think it's, you know, hard to pull Seth Smith out of the lineup at this point based on the way he's played. But, you know, good problems to have. But all that being said, they're not hitting the ball the way I expect them to.
No, they're not. I mean, they've been, you know, they've kind of hovered right in that, you know, 18th to 22nd in runs scored per game. You know, and you know that they weren't really hitting when they were winning. I mean, let's remember that. I mean, the best way I can put it with really all the way around, they've been very good up until these last 4 losses. They had been very good at being opportunistic. They'd pitched well in most of their high leverage situations, and they've been really good with runners in scoring position offensively. And that, you know, kind of explains why they've been able to win so many close games early in the season. But, you know, as much as we've talked about, you know, we've spent a lot of time talking about the rotation and Gausman and not knowing what's going to happen with Tillman and having Jimenez and Miley being such wild cards and hoping that Bundy continues to do what he's done. You know, the bullpen's clearly in a time of need. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And part of it is they had to work really hard early in the season. I mean, all those close wins, they still come at a cost. When you have to use your 3 or 4 best relievers to win a game, you'll gladly do it because it's better than the alternative, but at the same time, that has an effect on the next 2 or 3 days. It has an effect on the next 2 or 3 weeks sometimes, depending on how the workload goes. So in the meantime, until they get Zach Britton back and until they hopefully get Brad Brock straightened out and Darren O'Day pitching more like he did a couple years ago and, you know, not being the guy who's kind of been more inconsistent over the last, you know, better part of a calendar year, you know, they need their offense to pick it up a little bit. You know, it was nice. Believe me, what they did Sunday was more than good enough to win when you score 8 runs. I mean, but there have been a lot of games, including the first 2 games of the Kansas City series, where, you know, they combined for 5 runs in those 2 games. I mean, that's not going to get it done. And when you're needing to lean on the likes of Alec Asher and Vidal Nuno and guys of that nature, sometimes having to pitch the 6th and 7th inning because you don't have all your full array of your top bullpen guys available on a given night, you got to score some runs. You got to make it a little bit easier on those guys. I have a tough time blaming Alec Asher or Vidal Nuno for losing a 3-2 or a 4-3 game if you're only scoring 2 or 3 runs. This is an offense this team is constructed to, doesn't have to be the best offense in baseball, but hit a lot of home runs and be an above average offense. And to this point, they haven't really done either of those. I mean, even home runs, they haven't been you look at them, they've kind of been, slightly above that league average in home runs. So as much as it's been nice to see Trey Mancini and amazingly, Francisco Pena had a 2 home run game over the weekend, which, interestingly enough, he and Mancini, the first 2 Orioles to have multi-home run games this year. Go figure. You probably could have won a lot of money making that bet back in February, but they're waiting for Trumbo to get going. Chris Davis, it was nice to see him swing the bat the way he did over the weekend. You hope that's him snapping out of it because beyond the first 10 days of the season, hadn't done a whole lot. Manny Machado has had his moments, but he's hitting .221. So, I mean, those 3 guys alone, those are the 3 big boppers. That's the heart of your order right there. You need those guys to rake, and you need those guys to rake often. And you're hoping those guys can carry your offense for extended stretches of the season. And to this point, really haven't seen that. And in the meantime, Adam Jones has cooled off. Dealing with a little bit of a hip issue. They gave him the day off on Sunday. You hope that's not something that lingers. But when you're leaning on guys like Caleb Joseph to be your big offensive producers here in recent days, kind of speaks to nothing against Caleb. I mean, he's swinging the bat a lot more like he did 2 years ago. We knew he was capable of being better than what he was last year. But when you're talking about him being the guy you're leaning on for offense, it just speaks to how some of the other guys in the lineup aren't getting the job done. So they'll heat up, but you hope it happens in a way that more than one guy's heating up at one time, and you can go through some periods where you can win some games despite not pitching your best, because this team's going to need some stretches like that. There's no doubt about that. We saw it last June. Remember, they were almost historic in how they were producing at the plate, and they won a ton of games that month, despite the fact they didn't pitch very well over that stretch. So with Britton being out, with the rotation being as uncertain as it is beyond Bundy at this point, they need the offense to pick it up, and that's how you're able to endure some of that. That side of that phase of the game needs to carry this team for a while, because they really haven't been asked to do a whole lot of that so far this season, despite all their success early on.
So in a nutshell, I'm expecting the pitching to get worse and the hitting to get better. That's what I expect. And look, man, I've been a little AWOL the last couple of weeks, right? Run around with the Caps. Anybody that follows my journey knows where I've been and my passion for that. And obviously the Wizards getting eliminated and bounced out on Monday night against the Celtics. The Orioles now, along with lacrosse, and I know the horse race is going to run this week that nobody really cares about around here, that we make half a big deal about. Your sister's also going to get married, so I want to tip my cap to that. But, the Orioles are now really in full focus the next 90 days and spotting themselves, 650 ball most of the way. They've bought themselves a nice little period here over the next 60 to 90 days to be relevant, to be sort of the only thing going on, at least in this side of the Beltway.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And, hey, we talk about it all the time. I mean, you and I both were when they were 22-10, we knew they weren't a team that had a winning percentage approaching, in that 700 neighborhood. I mean, no one was going to expect them to continue to do that. But you bank those wins, you stack all those wins, you win as many games as you can when things are going well. You try to minimize the losing streaks. If they can stop this one at 4 and then stack some more wins, win a couple series here and right themselves, then all is forgotten, and then you just move forward with the rest of the season. I mean, I saw a great point over the weekend. The difference between baseball fans and the NFL is you have 162 data points over the course of a season. I mean, there are going to be some stretches that are absolutely terrible, and there are going to be some stretches where you think, hey, this might be the best team in baseball. We've seen the Orioles have some really good stretches, and now this is really the first stretch where you kind of take a deep breath and say, oh, that hasn't looked too good. And I don't think we've learned anything that we didn't already know about this team over the last few days, but it's a matter of, can you minimize the valleys? Can you prolong the peaks? And if you can do that, which they were pretty good at doing that last year, at least through the first 3.5 months of the season, and they were able to kind of tread water after that, it was good enough to get them into the postseason. So where they stand now, even after a 4-game losing streak, 8 games over in mid-May, you'll take that. You gladly would have taken that going into the season. Now it's a matter of how do you play moving forward. And with those wins stacked, now you're hoping you can get some more good mojo going, get some guys playing a little bit better than guys that are capable of playing better than they have to this point, and start stacking some more wins and put the lost weekend in Kansas City behind them.
He is Luke Jones. He's going to be monitoring all things Birds as they're out in Detroit for the next couple days, back home this weekend against the Blue Jays. And, of course, the Preakness here, the Caps and the Wizards eliminated, and full-time baseball. We're also going to do some football around here. You can always find Luke at Baltimore Luke on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. Also has a nice piece up about Kevin Gosman if you want to check that out at the website. You can find me anywhere the internet is served: Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Don't forget, the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault's going to house everything that we do around here all week long. You can listen live from anywhere in the world. Just download that TuneIn radio app. The morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That is powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. And last but never least, breaking news always happens first on the WNST text service. Orioles have been making that thing move and groove with pitchers back and forth. We'll see how that turns out later on in the week. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And, of course, Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday driving you home from 3 until 5. I plan on joining him as well. I'm still tallying off from my Capitals travel adventures to Pittsburgh and Toronto. Obviously, I spent the last weekend out in Vancouver and Seattle and Portland with some friends and watching YouTube. But I am back in the cockpit, ready for the Preakness this week. You can always find me, Nasty, at WNST.net. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.